Hi, I'm Michelle Cobb, publisher of AudioFile Magazine. We're the #1 source for audiobook reviews in the world, and I'm very excited to be here today with you to talk about British mysteries. So let me take a moment and say thank you to our fantastic sponsor, Belinda. If you have not listened to any of their audiobooks yet, I do suggest you give them a try. Plenty of British mysteries, Australian titles. We did a webinar about Tim Winton audiobooks recently that I recommend you go to our YouTube channel and check out if you did not see. All right, we've got some excellent guests here today. First off, John Hopkins. He is best known for his role in Midsummer Night Murders, Poldark, and the Netflix animation Hilda. And all of this, of course, reflects his versatility. His voice is what they call deep and sensuous and creates a sense of ease. So he's voiced many audiobooks, including the AudioFile Earphones winner, The Killing at Badger's Drift by Carolyn Graham, and he has lent his sonorous tones to plenty of video games. Eva McMahon is an actress and voiceover artist with close to 200 books to her credit. She trained at RADA, and I think actually with John, if I'm correct, and has gone on to work with RSC, National, Young Vic, Royal Court, and Abbey Theatres, as well as BBC TV and Radio, RTE, and many others. She has won awards for both her screen work and her audio work, including an AudioFile Earphones Awards for narrating Sally Rooney's Normal People. Jennifer Kirby trained at Lambda before taking roles at the Royal Shakespeare Company and in numerous television dramas. She made her television debut in an episode of BBC One drama Holby City. And she's known to myself and many of you for her portrayal of Valerie Dyer in Call the Midwife over 4 seasons. She's been nominated for National Television Award, the Ian Christensen Award, and an Evening Standard Award. And then we have Antonia Beamish. Born in London, she's lived in many places, including Africa, South America, France, and New York City. She's voiced audiobooks in a wide variety of accents, I think helped by all of this travel, including her earphone-winning title, Charlie Gallagher's The Deadly Houses. She's recently achieved distinction in a creative, digital, and professional writing MA at London's Metropolitan University. All right, if you have friends that would like to get in touch with all of these fine British narrators, I highly recommend you go to our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/c/AudioFile Magazine. And please listen for our reviews every single day on our Behind the Mic podcast, which you can find on wherever you listen to your podcast every weekday. And then we periodically have Audiobook Break. Right now, we have 2 titles up. These are serialized audio programs. So we have a play collection, the Japanese American collection from LA TheaterWorks, and just in time for Halloween, we have Dracula from Dreamscape, read by Gildart Jackson. All right, thanks for coming here today. You're definitely not here to see me, so let's go kick off and hear a reading by one of our fantastic narrators. We're going to start with John. John, if you can tell us what you're reading and a little bit about it.
I am reading an excerpt at the beginning of The Killings at Badger's Drift. It's the first of the Caroline Graham Midsummer Murders stories, in which a very intelligent elderly woman arrives at a police station and informs Tom Barnaby, the star of the books and TV show, that she thinks her friend's death is somewhat mysterious and that there's some questions to be asked about it. Miss Bellringer settled herself in the chair that Sergeant Troy drew forward and rearranged her draperies. She was a wondrous sight, festooned rather than dressed. All her clothes had a dim but vibrant sheen, as if they had once, long ago, been richly embroidered. She wore several very beautiful rings, the gems dulled by dirt. Her nails were dirty too, and her eyes moved all the time, glittering in a brown, seamed face. She looked like a tattered eagle. I'm Chief Inspector Barnaby. Can I help you? Well, She eyed him doubtfully. May I ask why you're in mufti? In what? Oh, he followed her stern gaze. I'm a detective. Plainclothes. Ah, satisfied, she continued. I want you to investigate a death. My friend, Emily Simpson, was 80 years old, and because she was 80, a death certificate has automatically been issued. If she'd been half that age, questions would have been asked. A post-mortem carried out. Well, not necessarily, Miss Bellringer. That would depend on the circumstances. It had been years since Barnaby had heard such an accent. Not since his early days of going to the pictures. In the post-war years, films had been full of clean-cut young Englishmen with straight up-and-down trousers, all sounding their as like airs. Well, the circumstances here are very strange indeed. They didn't sound all that strange, thought Barnaby, picking up a notepad and pen. Apparently, his visitor's friend had been discovered lying on a hearthrug by the postman. He had needed a signature for a parcel, and not getting any reply to his knock, except the frantic barking of a dog, had peered through the sitting-room window. He came straight to me. He's been our postman for years, you see. Knew us both, and I telephoned Dr. Lessiter. That's your friend's GP? He's everyone's GP, Inspector. Well, all the elderly in the village, and those without transport. Otherwise, it's a 4-mile trip into Causton. Well, I hurried over, taking my key, but in the event it wasn't necessary because... Miss Bellringer lifted a compelling, annunciatory finger. And this is the first odd thing. The back door was unlocked.
Ooh, we end on a cliffhanger there. All right, I have a question for you, but I also want to invite the audience to use the Q&A box. Go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A box. All right, John, this is an older book series, and it has a long-running television series. You played the role back in the early 2000s, I guess. So
Yes.
what was it like to work on both the audiobook and the TV show? And did one influence how you portrayed the other?
Yeah, I did this from 02 to 05, I think it was, for a couple of years. And I'm the second sidekick. Sergeant Troy, who's mentioned in this excerpt, is the sidekick created by Caroline. And I was the follow-on actor when Daniel Casey, who played Troy, decided to leave. I had not read the books when I joined the show, and I did not, for some reason, consider the possibility of reading the books when I did the show. It was very busy, and I was in all the time, so perhaps I didn't have time. But reading them now, oh, how I wish I'd read them then, because they are so witty and erudite and intelligent. She only wrote, I think, 7 stories, and by the time I joined, the new stories were being created by the scriptwriters. But they place you so immediately in a world which is intelligent, slightly intellectual, gently learned, full of French, Latin tags, Shakespearean references, and a sort of beady-eyed humanity on the goings on in a village life. And I read the books now, and I immediately think, now I know how I should have played it 20 years ago, which is amazingly frustrating, but also pleasant. They're really, really, really good. They're really good. And there's a lot of humanity in them, and there's a lot of warmth. And she seems, I don't know her, but she seems like an incredibly kind woman who has a lot of faith in humanity, which is nice in a murder mystery, because often those are about the worst elements of humanity. But this is ultimately, these are optimistic and positive books. The only other way it affects me is that I do a gentle John Nettles impression when I'm playing Tom Barnaby, because he played Tom Barnaby, and I sat next to him for 2 years listening to him talk. So now I do a slightly sing-song thing that he used to do as well. So that's those are my main influences.
So one of our audience members is asking, how do you keep track of various types of British accents for different characters? Because it seems very nuanced to her, at least to an American listener, she's saying.
That's very kind of her. I think I have I've got 3 accents. I think I've got posh, I've got normal, I've got a bit of Cockney, we're up to, a general Northern, and then maybe a general American. So I think I've got 5 accents, really. And I just cycle through those. There's not many Americans in Midsummer Murders. I cycle through those, and then I go high or low. And sometimes I go a bit croaky, and sometimes I go a bit squeaky. But I do... that's a semi-serious response. I do make a little accent note on each character before I do all the recording, and then try and refer to them. And Midsummer's fun because as well as just accents, you really can play with characterizations, because they're all slightly bonkers village eccentrics. So you have a degree of latitude to get a bit charactery, which is fun.
No, I'm no actor, but I always imagine that it must be kind of an actor's dream to play all those characters that you can't when you're on film or television. You only get one. Maybe it's a
Yeah,
nightmare. I don't know.
it's a total joy, yeah, because you really do get carte blanche to exactly play roles that are wildly out of your range. The nightmare is when someone has two lines, and the narrator gaily would have said he spoke in his broad Southampton accent, and you go, oh great, I've got 12 words, and I've got to find a Southampton accent, which is going to take me an hour to learn or to come up with some version of. That's the downside of it. But yeah, the upside of it is you get to be everyone. It's great. You're like Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream. You get to play all the parts.
Well, speaking of playing all the parts, Jennifer, let's turn to you. What are some of the major differences you've experienced between acting for stage or screen and narrating audiobooks, besides, of course, playing all the characters?
I think narrating audiobooks is probably more relaxing. I get to sit in a nice chair and read for days on end, which is quite nice. And I think there's a sort of intimacy with audiobooks. I think there's a kind of coziness, because I was always a fan of audiobooks before I ever started reading them. I've listened to them since I was tiny, you know, my mum introduced them to me. So I think it always feels a little bit like home, like coming home, a little bit like reading some literature. But yeah, I'd say there are a lot of similarities, because you still have to kind of work with the text that you're given and try and get things out of it. But obviously there's a lot more usually to go on. Yeah, I'd say that's probably what I'd say on that.
So Aoife, I'm curious, what's your favorite part about narrating an audiobook?
I suppose it has to be character. I mean, we're all actors here, so that's how I approach the read when I'm preparing a book. You kind of have to do it forensically, especially when it's crime, because there's always a twist. And finding out what drives them, where they're from, what the influences on their voice or accent might be, and how you can embody that is a lovely challenge. And crime is good for that, because it does tend to be character-y. So you get lots of big characters, and it's the same with young adult books as well, you know, where you get to be a dragon or a witch or a crow or something like that. And you can just have loads and loads of fun with it.
Well, Antonia, I'm going to flip that question on you and ask, what's your least favorite part of narrating an audiobook versus these other forms? I know, I throw you the tough one. You're still on mute.
There's a lot of noise in my house. That's why I put myself on mute.
No worries.
The worst part is when well, not the worst part. It's really difficult when you're reading one of these mysteries. I've done a lot of series, and when there's loads and loads of baddies, and they're all men usually, and they're all from the same place, but you have to distinguish between them somehow without going too kind of, you know, sort of too extreme. And it's trying to, you know, distinguish between them, but not going too ham and making them believable. And
That's why I do. I definitely do that one.
what, go ham? Well, so do I. And I remember once I was doing a really kind of nasty series. You know, they did nasty things to people, and there was this character who was coming up, and he didn't really speak. He just made noises. And I was recording this with a producer, and I just decided to really, really go for it and just go extreme, like extreme, ridiculous, crazy noises with this guy. And it was hilarious. The producer was totally kind of, you know, trying not to laugh. And then another bad thing is when you get a book and one of the characters is a parrot, and you say, presumably you don't want me to squawk like a parrot, and they say, no, you know, every word as the author intended. So you do pages and pages of parrot squawking, and then there's a minor bird in the book, and the parrot imitates the minor bird. I mean, to be honest, I had great fun, but I pity anybody who tries to listen to that book, because literally there's pages and pages of me squawking like a parrot, me being a parrot imitating a minor bird, etc., etc., etc. Very good book, but very noisy.
Very noisy. I love that. That's a great description of an audiobook. Very good book, but very noisy. All right. Well, we're going to go on to our next reading, although I will put out in the universe, John has now read an audiobook and was in the TV show. And Jennifer, of course, was in, Call the Midwife, which already has an audiobook, but maybe it's time for an updated version. We're going to put it out in the universe to get her narrating those. All right, Aoife, tell us what you're reading from, another mystery, and a little setup.
Okay, so this is High Pressure by Sam Blake, and we find ourselves in London in the Irish Embassy. It's a really hot summer. There have been a few terrorist hoaxes in high places like Wimbledon and stuff like that. And we've just had a couple of real bombs, one on Oxford Street and a chemical attack outside the embassy. Inside, we're going to meet Bryony, who's 18 with a shock of pink hair. She's just back from backpacking. She's a bit of a computer whiz, so she's sort of like a little cyber pixie in real life. And Anna Lockhart, who is a professor and a terrorist expert. The bomb has just gone off outside. Okay, so I'll read a little bit. Anna breathed deeply, listening to her body, blocking out the room. She was in control here. Nothing was happening inside the room. Whatever was going on outside wasn't her problem. She was safe here. She was in the embassy of a neutral country. Why attack the Irish? They were everywhere, had fled oppression and famine to populate every corner of the world. Anna felt a hand on her arm and realized she had her eyes closed. They flew open to a shock of pink. Are you okay? Bryony kept her voice low. You've gone a bit pale. Anna smiled weakly. I'll be fine, I think. Thank you for asking. It's the bomb? Don't worry. Look, come away out of this crowd and close your eyes again. Bryony led Anna to the back of the room. You're grand. I'm right here. Bryony put her arm under Anna's forearm, linking their fingers tightly. Between the wall and Bryony's touch, Anna felt some of her tension lift. She closed her eyes. She could control her breathing. She could. She gripped Bryony's hand, so grateful for her in that moment. Anna knew how powerful human touch could be in communicating empathy. It could have a pain-killing effect. She felt her heart rate begin to slow. More breaths, slowly, almost there. She opened her eyes again. Thank you, really. Anna smiled, suddenly embarrassed. I think I'm good now. Bryony gave her hand a reassuring squeeze and stepped away to give her some space. Around them, the audience who had gathered for the award announcement had moved into the room, away from the windows, were clustered in tight knots, many with mobile phones to their ears. She could hear urgent conversation, but not what anyone was actually saying. The sound of advancing sirens was loud.
Ooh, that was tense.
Yes, indeed.
How do you, tap into that tension? You're sitting here, you're relaxed, and then the next moment you have to find that tension. What are you using to do that?
Well, I guess the author has done a lot of the work for me in that excerpt, because although it's written in the third person, it's sort of from the point of view of the character. And she's a character that has appeared in previous books as well. Sam Blake often does that. She weaves the same characters into different narratives. So with a little bit of her background, knowing that she herself has been a victim in the past and where her fear is coming from, and that she has the training as well to use her breath. So kind of keying into the breath and the rhythm, and yeah, the tone and what might be going through her mind. So without completely giving a performance, just stepping into character a little bit whilst remaining the narrator. And hopefully that kind of brings across the emotion that's in the room.
Excellent. Well, we're talking about mysteries, and we've got some questions here. How do you manage to narrate a mystery that contains graphic violence, right? I imagine that, with the bomb, there might be some violence. Is that a challenge? And how do you approach that and get around it?
I find that the best way to do it, and often it's women who are victims of violence in crime novels, is to not sensationalize it too much. It's there on the page, when the writing is good. So just kind of report it in a way, I guess, with empathy and compassion.
That makes sense. All right, Antonia, over to you. How are some of the ways that you get listeners to connect with the audiobooks emotionally? Whether it could be this dramatic tension scene, or it could be something that's very different, humor, romance. What tools are you drawing upon to drag the listener into that emotionality?
Well, I have to echo something that Aoife said. The author kind of does it for you. And, however much I think I'm going to react to a story, because there are 7 types of stories, and they're written in a certain way, and this happens and then this happens. But every single time I just get swept away with it. And, I get wrapped up in the story. And I used to do much more romance than I do now. And I always used to, fall in love with my partner all over again by the end of the book, and it was the same, what's the word? The same narrative, the kind of, can't find a boyfriend, and actually they're just there hiding in plain sight, the whole time, or girlfriend, or whatever it is. So, and with the mysteries, it's the same, and I've prepped all the books, obviously, and then your the denouement or the fight scenes or whatever, they're just kind of this energy that goes really, really quickly. And I do get quite physical, which can be difficult, because you've got to remain quite still, or the microphone picks up everything. But it's it's in the writing, and obviously you have to pause, or you're going to get carried away, and the audience is not going to hear anything. But yeah, I just get swept up in the story. Ever since I was little, everything I read, I just immediately put myself in that position. That's why I wanted to be an actor, to kind of play the role. I always just saw myself in all the roles. So audiobooks is perfect.
I'm curious then, what was what got you into narrating audiobooks? If you wanted to be an actor, but what was the first step into the audiobook world?
Oh, it was, I was doing a play with an American, and it was an American play. And he said, "Oh, your American accent is great. You should do audiobooks." I didn't even know what audiobooks were. And I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah, call this guy." So I called the guy, and I went, and the guy said, "Do this accent." And I did it. And he said, "Do that accent." And I did it. And he said, so I did all these accents. And then, and then actually my agent called. I think really that I got into it accidentally, because she called me and she said, "That book that I put you up for?" I was like, "No," because she hadn't mentioned anything to me. "They want you to do it. Can you go on this date?" And I was like, "Okay." And to this day, that was 10 years ago, to this day, I still think that, it was a mistake and they booked someone else, but my agent made a mistake and they sent me. And so that's what that's how I got into it.
Well, a very lucky mistake for us
Yeah.
listeners out there.
Well, thank you.
All right, Jennifer, another audience question. Have you ever narrated a story or voiced a drama style audiobook and then wanted to stick around and do maybe the series?
Yes, I mean, the book that I'm going to read from, I've done a couple of those books. They're a series of mystery novels. So I was really happy to be asked back twice to do that. It made me feel good, made me feel like I did a good job of sort of creating that world, or helping to create the world. And it's always a bit sad when you end up being busy when they want the sequel read, because I did one like that quite recently, and I would have loved to have carried on, but I was just busy on another project. So then they had to have somebody else come and take over. So it's sort of it's a bit sad, because you think, oh, I kind of, that was sort of part of my thing, and I wish I could go further with that. But it's just part and parcel of it, really.
So I'm curious, I'm going to ask you too, how did you first get into audiobooks?
I asked my agent, I think, because I'd been doing stage and screen stuff for, I'd say, sort of 6 or 7 years without ever doing any kind of voice work. And weirdly, I don't know why I'd never thought of it before, because as I said, I love audiobooks and I listen to them all the time. It just, some reason, maybe it just never occurred to me. It felt like it was a different world or something. So I asked my agent and I said, what about, what about voice work? What about audiobooks? And so they started putting me up for them. And very luckily I started to get them, and I love it. I'm very happy that I sort of pursued it, really.
Excellent. All right, John, now you've gone from like being in a television show to narrating the audiobooks. Have you ever narrated an audiobook and then hoped, to be in the television show of that audio as well?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I don't think so. Not that I've narrated audiobooks and gone, I'm glad I'm not in the film of this. I'm not sure that I've done other stuff that has then turned into been turned into screen work. I've done as an adjunct to that, I've done quite a lot of video game work, and a lot of those then end up becoming option for TV series. So there's a couple of games, a Tom Clancy thing and a thing called Horizon Zero Dawn, which I'm in, which I'd love to be in the show of, which they're making, which I probably won't be in the show of. So that's that longing lives on. But no, I haven't. I got into audiobooks. The question didn't ask me, but I'm going to answer it anyway. I got into audiobooks. There's a thing called Book at Bedtime on Radio 4 at 10:45 p.m. on Radio 4, which was my bedtime when I was about 13, and then wasn't for years, and is now my bedtime again. And I remember listening. I remember so clearly listening to. Oh, that's so irritating. I can't remember it now. Anthony Hopkins in the film, The Remains of the Day. Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day, at 10:45 every night for a couple of weeks. And it was so evocative in the dark, and the voice was right there with you, and it was so soothing. And it felt like a little secret. And then I was like, I want to be a part of this world. I want to be a part of this world. It took me ages to do it. It took me almost 20 years. But I'm thrilled to be doing it now.
Well, we're thrilled that you all have had these journeys into audio and that we get to listen to you at our own bedtimes every night. All right, we're going to turn things over to Jennifer for the next reading. So tell us what you're going to read from and a little bit about it.
So I'm going to read a little bit from Murder at Mount Ephraim by Julie Wassmer. And it's one of the series of novels that I was previously talking about, called The Whitstable Pearl Mysteries, which are very, very popular and have been turned into a TV show. And yeah, they're brilliant. They center around Pearl, who is mostly a restaurant owner in Whitstable, which is in the UK, but she moonlights as a private detective, which is quite exciting. And so in this particular extract, she's gone away for the weekend to an old friend's wedding, and she is on the phone to her policeman boyfriend, rather dishy policeman boyfriend, Maguire. So this is that. "Sorry to ring so late," said Pearl. "I missed your call." She was speaking in a hushed tone as she sauntered down to the meadow in front of the old stable block, having made an excuse to leave the guests on the terrace. The stable block was framed like a black silhouette against a moonlit sky as she made her way towards it. Maguire ran a hand through his blonde fringe. "I didn't mean to hassle you," he said gently. "You didn't?" He smiled, relieved. "Having fun?" "It's intriguing." "The house, you mean?" "Everything," she replied. "It's strange, but I feel like I'm on a trail, picking up clues. Clues, echoed Maguire. To what? I'm not sure, said Pearl. Yet. Maguire recognised something in her voice. Curiosity killed the cat, he said. You're there for a wedding, he reminded her. I know, and I'm looking forward to it, but I can't help thinking that the wedding will only be one part of this weekend. Maguire sat up, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Something Amy's fiance's just told us, said Pearl. I can't explain right now, but it's bound to make headlines. In the Swale Gazette, Maguire teased. Guy Priddy's a wealthy man, said Pearl. A lot of people will be very interested in his plans. What plans? Pearl could hear the frown in Maguire's voice. I told you, I can't explain now, but I'll call tomorrow after the wedding.
Excellent. All right. Now, this book has a whole cast of characters because you've got this country house. So we've heard John only has 5 voices, right? But we've heard a lot about numbers here. I've learned today 5 voices from John, 7 books only, right? But how do you find
accents?
5 accents? Yes, that's right. How do you find all the voices to bring your characters to life? Because you've got the, some that are likable, like Pearl, and you've got some that are over the top, like Babs Meadows. So what's your technique?
I've always loved doing different voices. I think that's one of the earliest signs that I was going to be an actor, actually. And I was always a very shy kid, but I could always imitate people really well. And I think what I try to do is I try and remember that when I'm listening to an audiobook, there's only certain characters that I want to be you've gone full into the character, if you think. And I think what I try to do is when I read the book initially, just try and sort of come up with a few words to describe those people, and then just see what comes out when I go to read them. Trying to work on instinct a bit, rather than saying, well, this person's got to be a Geordie and this person's got to be this and this. There are certain things that are prescriptive within the book, but a lot of it I'll just try and make it as natural seeming as I can without worrying too much about how do I make all these people different and interesting, because I think if the book is written well, those characters will come out with time,
So you'll have to explain for some of the Americans here. What's a Geordie?
You know what? I shouldn't have said Geordie. I should have said Mackham, because my parents are Mackhams. And that is, a Geordie is from Newcastle, which is in the northeast of England. And as is Sunderland, which is where my parents are from, and they would be called Mackhams. It's just what you call them. and they're
please do the accent. Please do the accent. Please.
Yeah, you got to do this.
Please do the accent.
I can't. I've really shot myself in the foot there, because that's one of the only ones, despite hearing it my whole life, I still can't really do. So pretend I never said it. I'm sorry, Mum.
All right, we're just going in the way back machine there. All right, so this is a question I'm going to ask each of you. What are some of your favorite characters that you've ever played in audio? And then what did you like about them or not like about them? Because sometimes the most memorable characters are ones that are quite terrible. So Aoife, let's start with you.
Well, I've just finished a book called The Children of Gods and Fighting Men. And it's almost a historical novel set in medieval Ireland, but it's mixed up with the Irish myths, which, to be honest, we treat like history anyway. So in the middle of actual battles for the High Kingship of Ireland, you've got this fire fairy, and she was great fun to play, totally self-serving, completely a villain, power hungry, and also powerful, but she was walking amongst humans, so they didn't know it. And on the other side, you had a member of the Tuatha De Danann, which are mythical warriors, and she was a healer. And to play those two almost magical female characters walking amongst humans without them knowing it, tied up in battles that happened in castles and places that I know from home and that are very dear to me, was really good. It was fun to inhabit them. And I got to play both of them.
Ooh, we should be listening for that one then, definitely. Antonia, what about you? Any favorite characters?
Well, I'm recording the second book in a series at the moment of mysteries set on the Suffolk coast, and set in the 1970s, the early 1970s. And one of the lead characters is called Laurel Bowman, and she's an accidental detective. And she's very tall and broad and strong. You know, she's not a kind of sort of graceful, delicate. She used to be a PE teacher, physical education teacher in school. And I'm really, really enjoying her. And her sidekick, or not sidekick, the other detective, is called Frank Diamond. And he's a kind of, you know, very cool Scouser who, you know, drives around in a very cool car. But it's all in the early 70s on the Suffolk coast. So I'm really enjoying those. Early last year, I was lucky enough to record an extraordinary book, which is a non-fiction book about the Dark Queens. It's called The Dark Queens, and it's about Ethelreda and this other queen that I'd never heard of, who basically between them ruled Europe, the whole of Europe, in the kind of 10th century AD or whatever. We'd never heard of them. They're absolutely amazing. But then my favorite ever one, but this is because of the accent, was he was a tiny role and he was an awful person. But I recorded a book by Val McDermid years ago, and it was basically loosely based on a celebrity TV person, a TV celebrity. What do you call them? I can't remember. And she had this boyfriend, this kind of very useless boyfriend, who was a kind of trying to be street, but was actually quite middle class. And he was doing this kind of Jafaican accent. And it was just such fun to do because I know that accent quite well. So I enjoyed that.
Well, that sounds like some good ones. John, what about you? Any favorite characters?
It's a cheat, but I do the voice for a Netflix animation called Hilda, which is a really joyous story of a young girl who lives in a kind of semi-fantasy Scandi world, if I can call it that, which has hints of the Moomins in it, and I play a sort of bullish troll hunter called Eric Alberg. It's a world where there are trolls who are largely peaceful, but Eric Alberg, in order for sort of egomaniacal reasons, tries to agitate the trolls in order to gain more power for himself. He's a sort of, you know, military-industrial bully. And he's incredibly pompous and sure of himself. And that was turned into an audiobook. So I got to play him in that, which is lovely. And also in a sort of dramatized audiobook of is it Good Omens? Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett.
Yes, yeah.
Which is it's been that was there was a full cast production of that, in which they had from the TV show Michael Sheen and David Tennant. But I got to play Death in that. Who shows up via the medium of audio recordings, TV. He'll show up on your radio and suddenly take over from Queen doing Bohemian Rhapsody, and suddenly Death will be on the radio. And it was sort of it was a cameo, but he was so brilliantly specific and monosyllabic, and there was a real intensity to him. I like playing Death, basically. That was my favorite.
Well, that's very memorable. All right, Jennifer, we'll ask you, but first, Aoife, what was the book that you were talking about with the two characters? Just the name of the book, because people want to look out for that.
Oh, The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, and it's by Shauna Lawless.
Fantastic. All right, Jennifer, favorite characters?
I think I enjoy playing characters that I would probably never play on screen or in a play or anything like that. So I did, I read an audiobook called The Locksmith, which I now can't remember the author's name, but it's like a full cast of like Cray Twins style East End gangsters. And I just loved that. I love playing kind of really kind of gruff, masculine, just characters that I would never get. I just find it really, really fun and exciting to play.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to head into our last reading with Antonia. All right, set this up for us. Tell us what you're reading from as well.
I'm reading from The Deadly Houses, which is by Charlie Gallagher. It's the 6th in a detective series about a female detective called Maddie Ives, and it's set all along the Kent coast, Folkestone, Dover, all that kind of area. And I've recorded the whole series. So Maddie was new on the block, and the detective that she took over from was kind of, a bit old school, a bit patriarchal, and a bit sad because he'd lost his wife. And she deals with a lot of kind of, misogyny, and because she's a woman, and she's very, very good at her job, and she doesn't give up. She's like a dog with a bone. And anyway, along the series, the older guy, Harry, he actually likes her, so they work as a team. This is the first page of The Deadly Houses. And I'm not going to tell you what happens because there's spoilers, but basically someone has shown up at the police station to tell them that he has committed a series of murders that have been committed. The book is about, the murders are around domestic violence and a group of men who feel put out by their wives, so have done nasty things, lock them up. I mean, they're pretty graphic, these books, I have to say. But they're very evocative of that Kent coast and the weather and the rain and I know that area quite well. So it's just like being there, really. The scream from the open first floor window made PC Ian Hesse quicken his pace. His head snapped upwards as he approached the door. The heavy rain pelted down past the peak of his hat to soak his face. There were 3 officers in front of him. The sergeant was in the lead with the metal battering ram and first to the front door. He thumped it hard with a fist and bellowed for it to be opened. The team waited in a staggered line behind him. A moment passed, and Ian heard nothing, only the falling rain and a gurgling drain. High above them, the sky flashed vivid white. Another scream forced its way out into the storm, the unmistakable shriek of a terrified woman. The sergeant set upon the door with the battering ram, and the door flexed grudgingly in its surround for the first few strikes. Then came a splintering noise as it started to give. It mingled with the sound of another scream. The rain seemed to lash at them harder. The noise of the guttering and drains seemed louder too. Now the line of officers had bunched, and Ian was almost beneath the eaves. Another streak of lightning acted like a camera flash, preserving the moment the ram struck the door for the final time. The drops of rain seemed suspended for a moment, and so did the officers. All of them hunched forwards like sprinters waiting for the starting pistol. The door gave way with a loud crack. It was the signal they had been waiting for. The shrieking house now had an open mouth. Inside was a wall of darkness. Ian was the last to pile into it. Da, da, da.
Whew, that was intense. You're dealing with a book that has a difficult topic, and it's got that kind of thrill, that intensity. So how do you maintain your own emotional distance and still hit that level?
Well, that's what acting is about, really. You have to be it, but you also have to be separate from it. I have to say, when you're working with a producer, particularly on the difficult subject ones, it makes it easier because you have someone to share it with. And I mean, I've read some pretty tough stuff. One of the hardest things I ever read, which actually I had to take a few days off afterwards, was a non-fiction book about rape as a victim of war, really. And there's no kind of therapy or anything for that, and it's but you have to do it. It's very important to put that out there, and so people know what's going on. But these kind of books, it's just acting, really. It's just fun. It's just trying to make it exciting and not too like Jennifer said earlier, you just kind of read it as it is, or was it Aoife? I can't remember, but you just kind of, don't sensationalize it. Don't make it even more awful than it already is. Does that make sense?
Completely.
Good.
All right, we're not going to talk about emotions and intensity, even though we're doing mysteries. one of the audience members would like to know, who do you listen to? Who are your favorite audiobook narrators? John, I'm going to start with you.
I answered this in the chat, I believe. I am a big fan of Tim Piggott-Smith, R.I.P., who passed away a couple of years ago, but he was an amazing stage screen actor. He's star of, I have to get this right, The Jewel in the Crown. Is that what we're calling it? Yes, thank you very much. And I was lucky enough to work with him at the beginning of my career, right at the beginning at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And he gave me an acting award when I was a student through the Sunday Times, which is very lovely as well. But I've listened to a lot of his stuff, and he is the sort of perfect mix of, as we've all talked about, I think, taking you into the story with the different characters, but also keeping that narratorial, authorial distance. And he's got such a commanding tone, which is not what you always want. Of course, you want something, sometimes more empathy, but he for the kind of stuff he reads, you feel like, oh, I'm in safe hands. He's got me. He knows what he's doing. So I'm a big fan of him.
Jennifer, you mentioned listening to audiobooks as a child. Who are some of your favorites?
Well, obviously, Stephen Fry, reading the Harry Potter books. That was sort of one of my first introductions into it. I was thinking just now, and I'm thinking probably Juliet Stevenson is up there for me. I love the way that she reads, particularly Jane Austen. I love the way she reads Jane Austen. There's loads of character, and her voice is so beautiful and calming, and there's a lot of humor in it as well, which I think is great for something like Jane Austen, because you always need to have that undercurrent of sort of cheekiness, I think, meaning more than you say, and all of that. So yeah, Juliet Stevenson.
I agree. Excellent. Aoife, what about you?
Here's where I have to admit I don't listen to audiobooks. I do listen to podcasts, and when I was a kid, my dad actually put loads of stories on tapes. We had loads of Aesop's fables and the old Greek myths and unusual things like that, not just the Ladybird versions of things. And he used to read them, and we'd listen to them on long car journeys. And I think that was my introduction to audiobooks. So I'm going to keep him as my favorite narrator.
I think that's a great choice. And see, you're carrying on a family tradition. That's lovely.
Yes.
Antonia, what about you? Any favorite narrators? You're still on mute.
I have to admit, I don't listen to audiobooks either, but it's not because I don't like them. It's because I can't concentrate. I can't, I'm, and I just fall asleep if I'm not doing anything else. But I have listened to Julie Walters, her reading her own life story on repeat over and over for 1 million car journeys, because my eldest daughter just loves Julie Walters. And I have to, it's just, listening to Julie Walters is a joy always. Listening to Julie Walters talk about her life is just absolutely fantastic. I also, in the same vein, listen to quite a lot of David Walliams books. And I know that it's not really PC, but Matt Lucas's performances in those books just, had me crying with laughter. He's just a genius, Matt Lucas. So, and I love voices. There's a lot of people who I would love to listen to their audiobooks, but I haven't got to that stage yet. As long as I can read, I'll be reading before listening.
Well, it's just reading with your ears. That's what we like to say in the audiobook world.
Yeah, ears aren't so good at that.
So, all right, well, let's end with a mystery question. We will take other audience questions. If you have them, please put them in the Q&A box. But here's a mystery question. How come so many mysteries are set on the Kent coast? Anyone have an answer for that? I don't know. Okay, Antonia.
I don't know if this is the answer, but I've recorded a lot of mysteries set on the Kent coast by different writers, all of whom are policemen. So I think there's some kind of policeman thing going on down there, where one guy's writing them and he's helping the other guy write them. And, maybe they have a writing club. Maybe there's a writers group in a police station in Canterbury somewhere, and they're all writing books. That's my suggestion.
All right, now we're going to have to go, solve that mystery and see if there's a policeman's writing group.
I think it's just a lovely place to be. It's a really lovely place to go to. and you've been a school teacher, you retire, you do an open university course in creative novel writing, and then that's where you live. So you just set it in your own town.
It's very much like Maine here in the US, the state of Maine. If there's a mystery book set there, I love the state of Maine. AudioFile Magazine is based in Maine, but also there are
Stephen
plenty of
King.
mysteries where, death in small towns in Maine.
And
All
there
right.
also tends to be Wicklow.
Ah,
Because it's fairly rural, it's mountainous, there are lots of lakes, lots of places to hide bodies, but it's very close to Dublin. So you can get your forensic experts out there.
excellent. So we see that small towns in whatever country are just bastions of murder and mayhem.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank each of you for joining us here today. It was great to get your insights and take away some of the mystery in recording audiobooks. There you go. There's my pun for the day. Thank you to AudioFile staff and, of course, to Belinda, not only for supporting us, but also for making sure all these incredible books are recorded so beautifully. All right. There's a couple of questions. I know that there's always, if I vamp long enough, there'll be one. So someone has directed a number of audiobooks, and somewhere along the line we'll run up about that problem. Do we need all the he said, she said, which is typical in an unabridged audiobook versus a dramatization? So I see John is typing an answer.
I stopped typing. I thought I'd say it.
Yes, please do.
I think in a dramatization, it's a problem. If you're doing a dramatization with multiple voices, then it becomes unnecessary. But I think in a book where one narrator is playing everyone, I think it remains entirely necessary. It's unclear, Brian Price, whether or not you've directed full dramatized audiobooks or single narrator.
He has definitely done some dramatized audiobooks.
That'll be the issue. Yeah, I don't blame him for wanting them out. I don't blame them.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you guys. Have a wonderful weekend. And thanks to all of our audience. Please be sure to send your friends to our YouTube channel to watch the replay. And of course, go to your favorite podcast app to listen to Behind the Mic and Audiobook Break. Have a fantastic day.
Thanks for coming. See you.
Bye.